sessions, 21 different sessions on subjects that the people who came to that summit on March 12th of last year said were the most important to them in terms of region-wide look at what NPOs could do, should do, and what resources they would need to do that. We have finished one. We basically are doing rounds of 3. So an introductory round, which Alex did for us, and that was back on November 28th. This is our second session where basically we're hoping that you, who are nice enough to join us and spend some time with us, will tell us what you think we ought to be doing, what you think we ought to be advocating on behalf of, and then one final session where we'll have a wrap-up report and tell you what we've taken away from this and ask you for your help as we go forward. I see that on this session we have our premier presenter. Hi, Mavis. So the RAND Institute, which is obviously well known for its subject matter expertise in transportation, among other issues across the region, was nice enough to start this. And they're the first to finish. They did an extraordinary job. I can't thank Mavis enough for how she has helped us. And I feel the same way about Alex. In fact, it was Mavis who suggested Alex be recruited to do this. So that's where we are. We appreciate you being here. If you would put your emails in the chat, Alex, if you would excise that information and make sure we get it so we can keep communicating with these folks. And that's all I have to say, other than thank you for joining us.
Michael, and thank you everybody for being here. If folks want to go ahead and put, as Michael said, their name and the organization you're calling from, if that's relevant, and your email address, that would be great so that we can keep all of that information. I also just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording this, and we'll send around the recording after the meeting. And I think I got rid of all of like the AI notes in here, but we'll also send around a meeting summary as well. So we had some Zoom snafus, I would say, in November when we did our first meeting. So I know that there's a lot of folks on this call that this is the first meeting where you're joining us. And so I am going to do sort of an abridged version of the overview that I did in November, just to level set and have us all on the same page. And then we'll give you all sort of a quick summary of the conversation that we had in November, and then we'll spend most of our time in conversation and discussion about what you all see as the biggest challenges in the housing space facing us now. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can everybody see that? Yes, okay, great. So just the overview for the day. I will walk through the goal and purpose. I'll give you housing landscape and then discussion. So Michael laid this out, but really our goal is to come up with what the biggest issues are in housing and how the Nonprofit Development Center of Southern New Jersey can take that information along with all of the other information and make some recommendations for paths forward. So just to level set, again, I'm going to walk through some slides here. So really want to, make sure we're all thinking about housing on a continuum, right? That can go all the way from folks who are unhoused, all the way up to market rate housing. And so there are issues in each of these stages of the housing continuum. And so we're not here to focus on one stage over the other. We're really here to have a full conversation about what are the challenges impacting all of them. So I think it's really important that we, understand and recognize the importance of housing. I always think of housing equals health and opportunity, the second bullet here. Everything starts with a home, right? Without safe and affordable housing, people aren't able to sort of enjoy all of the other parts of their lives and sort of live life to their fullest. And I think it's also really important to note that decades of residential segregation by race and class are largely responsible for a lot of the disproportionality that we see in health and other well-being outcomes across the state. And New Jersey in particular has some of the worst racial disparities across all indicators of health and well-being. And a lot of that is tied to the history of segregation and housing policy in New Jersey and across the country. Everyone can just make sure that they're muted. I don't want to mute you because then you won't be able to unmute yourself. So just walking through some data points, recognizing that this data is from the point in time count, which is a 1 day, right? Exactly what it says, point in time count. And so while we can use this data to compare over time and to see where we're at, it's not the best indicator of homelessness in a vacuum, right? We also have to consider other things, but you can see here over time from 2020 to 2024, the data trends in homelessness, and in particular looking at the sheltered versus unsheltered. And you can dig a little bit more into this data. This link, I'll make sure to share this after the call today, but where you can see by county and then dig into that sheltered and unsheltered. So I know on our last call, we talked a little bit about Camden and sort of the numbers went up, but that's really that the sheltered population, like we have, right, the numbers went up, but more people are sheltered. And so just being cognizant of that as you review the data. This slide is showing the disproportionality in homelessness by race and ethnicity. So you can see that for the Black population and the Latino population, they're disproportionately represented in the homeless population compared to the New Jersey overall population and also just the white population in general. So wanted to touch on affordable housing. So New Jersey is unique in that we are the only state in the country that has a framework to provide and require the construction of affordable housing throughout the state. And so some of you might be familiar with the Mount Laurel Doctrine. There was legislation passed last year to strengthen the doctrine and to put some statutory requirements around how municipalities have to build affordable housing and the number of units municipalities have to build. And since we met in November, there's been some more data around this. So out of the 169 municipalities in South Jersey, 112 filed with the program, which means that they are moving forward with building affordable housing, and only 15 filed objections to the numbers calculated by the state, which is pretty significant. So over the next 10 years, there will be thousands of units of affordable housing built throughout the state, and then hundreds of thousands, or sorry, in South Jersey, and then hundreds of thousands built throughout the state. These numbers at the bottom of the screen are from the National Low Income Housing Coalition's I can't remember the name of the report, but they put out this report every year. Then the report is a national report, but has state profiles. And so this number, this negative 214,000 number is often what is cited in terms of the gap in need in New Jersey. So we have more than a 200,000 home deficit in New Jersey in affordable housing to meet our need. And this is specifically the deficit for extremely low income renters. So that doesn't even consider, right? So this would be like very low. So it doesn't just, consider low and moderate, which we know there's also gaps in those categories too. And then just wanted to note that in addition to sort of the brick and mortar issues, right? Like the actual affordable housing and the lack of enough units of affordable housing, there's a whole host of other issues that go along with housing and access to housing. And so even when people are able to find housing, people experience discrimination when trying to rent. So we have protections in the Law Against Discrimination and the Fair Chance in Housing Act. We also know that evictions, particularly since COVID, there's been, and as the cost of living rises, the increase in evictions throughout the state and the problems within the landlord-tenant court system. So this third bullet here, that was a report done, I think last year, found that 69% of eviction complaints in New Jersey contain at least one legal deficiency, and 97% of tenants don't have a lawyer to defend them in court, as being another real issue. And then just habitability concerns as well. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure folks aren't asking questions in the chat. And then wanting to touch also on home ownership. So obviously, we talked about the continuum of housing, just recognizing that home ownership is a part of that continuum, right? We have renters, but then we also want to think about how particularly families that have been harmed by bad policy and discriminatory policy, and haven't benefited from intergenerational wealth, which is largely built from home ownership. And so, New Jersey has one of the highest Black-white wealth gaps. And so really thinking about how does home ownership play into the housing needs in our state and in South Jersey, and what does that look like, and how do we sort of address the wealth gap through home ownership, and what are the things that we can do to make that happen. And then here you can see the disparities based on the counties in New Jersey. So you can see that in South Jersey in particular, the low home ownership rates for Black and Latino families. And then just to summarize some of the takeaways from the first call that we did in November, and then we'll open it up to further discussion. Some of the things that came up in the policy space were around rent control and really the need to have stronger rent control protections. We talked about a need for an affirmative right to counsel in landlord-tenant proceedings. We talked about regulatory and in some cases statutory barriers to building affordable housing in certain areas. We talked about affordability deed restrictions and what happens when those run up. So those are the controls that when affordable housing is built, usually it's a 20 to 30-year deed restriction, depending on some of the funding sources. And then when that time frame is up, that unit then becomes market rate. And so in addition to not having enough affordable homes in New Jersey, we're also losing some affordable homes because those deed restrictions are coming up. And then we talked a little bit about streamlining vacant property acquisition and the challenges in getting clear title for some vacant properties, even when there are entities interested in taking ownership of those and redoing them and providing additional housing in those spaces. And then some of the special populations that came up in our conversation were veterans, individuals with developmental and physical disabilities, and then in particular survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and the need to have specific housing options for these populations. And then we also talked a little bit about tenant and homeowner education and the need to have programs for folks who are both renting and potentially buying their first home, and sort of how do you take care of a house? How do you budget? How do you pay your bills? Sort of the basics of being a good tenant and a good homeowner. So that's I went through a lot of information quickly to give us time to talk. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has before we jump into discussion. Any questions? Okay, so why don't I open, I'll open the floor up. Sort of what's top of mind for folks when you think about, in your work. I know all of you come from a variety of backgrounds, and are working with a variety of populations in the South Jersey area. So curious, when you think about what are the housing needs, what's top of mind?
Hey everyone, I'm Greg from Cooper Center for Healing. One of our biggest barriers that we run into is we have a lot of folks coming out of treatment facilities and they're unable to find sober living houses once they complete. So these facilities are releasing them from their program back out onto the street because of there not being enough housing and options available for them when they complete their program.
Thanks, Greg. And just on that note, I'm curious, it's more that like the housing isn't available and less about like the support to pay for the rent? Like they have the money to pay for the rent, but the actual housing isn't there?
A little bit of both, because as they're coming out of treatment, a lot of the people that are they begin their recovery journey as unhoused, and then they go into treatment, and then when they're released from treatment, they don't have anywhere to go because they don't have the funding to move into a house. And then once they move into the house, it's their barrier is finding a job to make that sustainable.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Absolutely, thank you.
Nicole, go ahead.
Hi. My biggest concern in Atlantic City is the median income. It's so low. So even though there's work being done to remodel some houses and make them affordable, there just aren't many people who can, even with assistance, consider taking on home ownership or move into a better place at all.
Yeah, so I think sort of the combination of the voucher amounts and rent subsidies aren't high enough for the current market. Also dovetailed with sort of, I think for rental units, like rent control also, right? And then just the amount of affordable, to the extent that that rent control and affordable housing can control some of the market. If there were more affordable housing, some of the market, it would have an impact on the market rate also. Thanks. Julie, go ahead.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much. Hi, I just wanted to address what Greg was saying. As far as funding goes, as long as Camden County verification is proved residency, we are more than willing to fund here. I know that if residency is not proved, then it has been an issue to fund. But we also are more than willing to share a list with, many sober living facilities and Oxford homes as well. But I feel like the only barrier that we've had as far as being able to fund people is if residency has not been able to be proved. Other than that, we're more than willing to fund.
Any other initial thoughts about the populations you all are working with, what you're seeing on the ground as being, barriers to housing or other needs in the housing space?
I would say for me, the affordable housing, like your low income tax credit, it's not really affordable to the populations that at least legal services is serving. The rents are too high. There's not a deep subsidy. Also, I think we discussed this. We desperately need rent control in New Jersey. There is right now no bright line rule for how much rent can be increased, and it's not uncommon. for us to see rents being increased 25, 30% or more. And that's got to stop. It's got to be tied to inflation or cost of living. And lastly, the things that we're seeing is even if we can save people's housing, you know, through court, we can't get money in time to stop an eviction. Different agencies have, it takes too long and the eviction process is very short. So those are the issues that I'm seeing.
Thanks, Maria. Can you just elaborate that last part? I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You can't get like a voucher for them to be able to pay the rent?
Well, depending on where we are, because legal services, we serve 9 counties, so we serve, you know, all of the southern counties. So if a person goes to court and they get a judgment for possession, for eviction, for non-payment, they have a very short period of time to pay that rent before they're evicted. And even after even after they're removed, there is some time where we could get them back into possession, but the money has to be, it can't just be, well, I've, you know, applied and there's an application and it's pending. The money has to be there. Or the judges will not stop the evictions. Some judges will do a promissory note, but it depends on how long it's going to take to get that funding.
Got it. So you mean like the back rent that was
Yes.
owed? Yeah.
Well, because sometimes people can stay, like we have people that can pay rent going forward, but they can't afford the back rent. And if that money's not paid, they can't stay.
Got it. Thank you. Any other issues people want to raise?
Alex, I just wanted to add a little bit to what Maria had said, and that we have a lot of issues with poor property conditions or habitability issues. And one issue with receiving rental assistance is that certain rental assistance programs will not disperse funds to someone who's in a property who's not, you know, not habitable. For example, they don't have a certificate of occupancy, and there's like outstanding violations or outstanding fines that are owed. That's a huge barrier. So through no fault of the tenant themselves, their property is not meeting the standards that are required. And so they're not able to receive those funds, even though financially and otherwise they would qualify.
I guess to that point, Ashley, like, what do you see? Like, is there a fix to that? Like, what's like the policy fix to that? Or is that, you know, like, what is that attached to? Is it state law, state rule?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of policy fixes involved. One is in New Jersey to even raise a habitability defense at trial, you have to deposit all of the rent that is alleged to be due and owing, not the actual amount, but just what the landlord's alleging. So if they claim that you haven't paid 3 months and you have late fees and you have attorney's fees, you have to be able to post that with the court in order to even raise the defense of habitability at trial. So a lot of people end up withholding their rent because of the conditions in their property, but then they have to dip into that for unexpected expenses or ones that are actually directly related to the lack of habitable living conditions that they have. So for example, they have no electricity, they have to pay for takeout, they have to, you know, pay for replacement of property that's been damaged by a massive leak, those types of things. So there's that issue, obviously. But then I think also some of the rental assistance funding actually has explicit provisions that say that you know, that the property has to have X, Y, and Z requirement as far as certificate of occupancy goes, or you know, no outstanding violations through the DCA. And that's an issue. Now, whether we should be pouring money into the hands of landlords who refuse to fix their properties is a whole other issue. But if there was some sort of mechanism to either get rid of the posting requirement for a Marini trial or habitability trial, and or allow something as far as like a letter of commitment from the funding source, where they agree that they will pay the amount, but they are actually withholding the rent, and compel those repairs before they pay the back balance, but not, you know, not evict the tenants in the meantime, I think that would be a really helpful fix. And obviously, the long-term benefits of that are not just to the family that's living in that property, but it improves the housing stock overall in our state and the safety, you know, available to our residents and decreases all of the health effects of poor housing.
Great, thank you. Anything else that people are thinking about? Are there certain populations of people? You know, I mentioned a few that were mentioned earlier. You know, I think that we are seeing across the state, just because of the cost of living and what's happening, you know, newer, younger, more families in the position of being unhoused. You know, so are there certain populations that folks are thinking about in addition to the three that were mentioned already? Or are there other issues that are coming up in the people that you're working with?
Probably something that crosses through all of these populations is a lot of mentally ill people have these issues, and they tend to have problems like they're getting lease violations or they're getting notices, and we need supports for people with mental illness so that they can maintain housing in public spaces. Because if somebody gets into an altercation with a neighbor, and we could make like an ADA defense, but there's got to be supports going forward so it won't happen again. And that's something that we see a lot, people getting evicted on those kinds of basis. And, you know, without some kind of community support, making sure people are med compliant, we can't save the housing.
So it sounds like, Maria, like an increased need for supportive services,
Yes,
for some populations.
yes.
Okay. And Mercedes, I see your note in the chat about the eviction issues. Anything that that folks think, you know, the whole purpose of this project is to really think about, you know, what is feasible in the South Jersey space. Is there something that could be piloted? Is there something that collectively, you know, folks across South Jersey can agree to sort of, you know, this is the thing that we should focus on, to just throwing that out there for folks to think about. Dr. Wagner, go ahead. Oh, I think you're muted.
Down. Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. So for us, I work a lot in our residential area, but we have transitional housing for young adults or what I call emerging adults, and then we really struggle to place them out, right? So they have to leave, at different ages, and that gets really difficult. And I think that not all of them have mental health challenges. Maybe their parents did, or you know what I mean, and they get lumped in into that. But I would say for young adults, and then just having them places where they can get around. I think that's one of the toughest things in South Jersey. We have about 58 programs throughout the state, and sometimes you're out in the cornfields, and that's not helping anybody. So I also think location, and the more dense it gets, the less people want it around. But I do think we have to have transit options too. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a ton of sense. Sort of the intersection with transportation and housing, right, are obviously closely related. If people are living in a place where they can't get to, where they need to work and play and do all the things to go to the doctor. And I think, I think the other interesting point you raised around young adults, well, certainly you're talking about a specific population of young adults, right, that are sort of aging out. Of transitional housing, which I think is usually like mid-20s ish. I think there's also, I think we're hearing a lot right now around, and I think honestly is some of the politics around why folks are talking about affordable housing and affordability is that a lot of like the white families whose children went off to college who are now coming back to New Jersey, right? Also, which is a different young person population, but also can't afford to find a place to live. And so, you know, thinking about how do you create a state where young people can live and choose to live on their own instead of living at home or in another place. And so that young population, I think, is another population, right, of folks to continue to think about. Other thoughts or ideas? You know, as I was saying, you know, the goal of this project is to really sort of come up with what are some things that we can really think about and focus on and maybe move the needle on, you know, as a region in the state. So curious if people have ideas about that.
Can I add a tail to that, dog, Alex?
Yeah, go ahead.
People have ideas that we could test. So it's not like we have the answer, but if somebody thinks that if we did X, we could actually determine if X could then be scaled up, have broader applicability, we would love to come up with some ideas that, because they've been perhaps tried somewhere else, or just because they haven't had the opportunity to actually be put out there to see if they work, we would like to try to identify those and have a small number that we could try to force some action on.
So can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, I certainly would love to partner. I mean, one of the thoughts that I have based on what you just said, Michael, was I know when my kiddos are coming out of transitional housing, right? We have a long lead time because they don't have to leave till they're 24, right? So we could really, it's not like circumstances, we can keep them. They don't get evicted. And so if we wanted to be part of an experiment, we would know exactly when someone would need housing and would have a lot of lead time because, you know, a lot of our kiddos are there for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So that's just a thought that, you know, sometimes you need someone and then they're not available to go because they found something else. We would certainly be able to partner in something where we could schedule, right? We would know when the move outs were.
Yeah, I would like, yeah, I'm so appreciative you're all sharing your thoughts and your time with us. We are happy to have small ideas and large ideas. Obviously, large ideas become more difficult. They require more resources, more time, more planning. But we want to get as many ideas on the table as possible, not because we'll be able to pursue everyone or we won't necessarily be able to advocate successfully for everyone, but we can push those along to other people who can. So we look at this as a purely collaborative effort. And to the extent that we end up with, say, a menu of half a dozen ideas that hopefully are bridge ideas between transportation and housing and, you know, healthcare and so on and so on. But small ideas that can grow, small ideas that have potential, we can't afford to overlook them. So we need to get them somehow into the report that we come up with so that they don't get lost. You all know them because you're all involved in this particular subject matter area. But those of us who aren't don't know these things. So to come away saying, we could do these 6 things, which are sort of bridge topics, but we could also be trying. For example, just think of it this way. We plan to have an NPDCSNJ day in Trenton. And who's going to show up at that day in Trenton when we get a room in the Capitol? All the legislators, not because they really care about what we're doing, but because if they don't show up, it'll be like, you don't care about nonprofits in South Jersey? Oh my gosh, you know, we will tar you with a very big, nasty brush. So if they visit with us and if we have ideas that we can articulate or that we can share in terms of details, somebody very possibly in that, you know, South Jersey delegation might latch onto them. I don't know what those ideas are, but we're willing to do our best, which may not be good enough, but we're willing to do our best to see that all the good ideas get visibility. And to the extent that we can help get them more than visibility, but get them real traction, you know, based on resources, we'll try to do that too, but we don't know what they are. So for example, the idea that Dr. Wagner just had, great, happy to try to do it. Seems pretty straightforward. I don't want to say easy, but would never have thought of that. So if you can help us out and feed to Alex today, or I guess, Alex, we could invite them to talk to you offline. I have an idea. They send you an email. When we meet for the third and probably last time, we'll say, these are the ones we think we can successfully advocate on behalf of, pursue. And somebody else might say, but what about, you know, my idea for blah, blah, blah. And we can reorder those priorities. One of the things we want to do once we're done is get as much exposure for all of the ideas as possible. So we want to take them back to the people from whom they came. That's you and all of your constituencies, but beyond that as well. So it's a process, but I think that one of the things we can do is create visibility. So I just wanted to share that. Sorry for the interruption, Alex.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Michael. So yeah, so any other thoughts, you know, given that context and ideas?
How about this, Alex? If we asked everybody, and I'll leave it up to you how to include everybody in the discussion, if you could do one thing, if you could create one program, initiate one project, even on a test basis, I don't mean, you know, projects that are millions of dollars, that would be fun, but not realistic. But if you could do one thing, what would it be? Or what would you like us to advocate for if it were one thing? Magic.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, I'll just say magic wand. So I handed the magic wand to Dr. Wagner. She says, we can do a lot of stuff, Mike, but here's something I think that is doable and would have, you know, wouldn't save the world necessarily, but would have a salutary impact that would be worth pursuing. So I don't know.
And thanks, Michael. And open for folks who want to wave their magic wand. But Mercedes also just wanted to acknowledge, I see some of your ideas in the chat around educating the young population, promoting first-time homeowner programs with no down payment, credit repair and educations, lessons on equity and loans. Yeah, so those are all great, especially thinking about education programs and what that looks like. Kristen, I see you're saying housing supports for people with disabilities.
Yeah, I mean, we represent people with disabilities in a lot of housing actions, and even when we can save the tenancy and or the voucher, the problem is that they need ongoing supports, like to help them open their mail and respond in an appropriate time, or reach out to legal in an appropriate time, or to just sort of you know, overall help them retain the tenancy. And the programs that are out there really don't do enough. They don't come by enough. They don't know when to refer people. And it, you know, it's just frustrating because there's only so much, you know, we can do in court.
So it sounds like increased, well, it sounds like there are some supports, but the supports are deficient in sort of how they're working for.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, what I see on a daily basis, they're just insufficient, you know. I mean, we see people with developmental disabilities being bounced to hotels because their support coordinators didn't reach out to get help. I mean, it's really bad in that regard.
Okay, that's helpful. And then Janaea, I see low income or income driven housing that's not Section 8 or DCA. Yes, I think, you know, with the Mount Laurel doctrine and the development of more affordable housing over the next 10 years, we're hoping that some of that gap is closed, but it's, you know, it'll never be enough. But yeah, and I think one of the key pieces of that is also thinking about some of these special populations and how does the affordable housing that's being developed address some of the special populations and special needs that we're identifying together. Dr. Wagner, I see you're saying a mentoring program for young adults. LaShonda, acquiring housing first, master leasing. Yep, so sort of expanding housing first programs that already are working, that we know work. And Mercedes, sorry, I'm reading. So thinking through sort of the transition from affordable housing or subsidized housing into sort of market housing and what that looks like, I think is what you're saying here. Great. Any other ideas folks have?
Alex, in addition to ideas, other people. So as the folks who are nice enough to be on this call look at who their colleagues are today, if they see that somebody from a government agency or an NGO or an NPO is not represented and could be helpful in terms of, pushing out the edges of this discussion, just tell us who they are so we can try to reach them.
Yep. Thanks, Michael. If there's others, definitely let us know. And then Kristen, I see what you're saying in the chat about, sort of the tension between trying, individuals trying to save, but also not being able to do so. Otherwise they'll lose their benefit.
Right. I don't think people realize how many disabled people there are in our country. And these programs, the way they're set up, are sort of designed to keep them in poverty. So like, it's great to say, let's help people transition out of subsidized housing, but then we need to change some of these laws and rules so that they can actually save and do it.
So just following up on what Kristen said, for example, Alex, I would have no idea what the population of folks is in the 8 counties that we serve that fall into that category. But I assume it's a fairly impressive number. Sometimes there are folks who respond when you say, well, that would be 1 million people out of the 3.8 million people in South Jersey who would be affected by that. And that gets their attention, as opposed to, I mean, I don't want to suggest that it's all driven by numbers, and certainly numbers make the solutions more difficult because they require more resources. But as we look at these things, just assume that you all know a lot of stuff about this area that the rest of us don't. So to have the most important facts, as Alex did in her presentation, which was spectacular when we started, for us to know those things and be able to pick out a few, not just salient facts, but a few like, oh my God, I didn't know that, would be very helpful to us in terms of how we would think about creating visibility and going about advocacy. Sorry, Alex.
No, that's okay. And Nicole, I see you put the, the stats that it's typically 1 in 4 adults. And so it would be about 1 million people in South Jersey. And actually, yeah, right. That if someone withholds rent for 2 months, they would then not qualify or disqualify themselves from SSI.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what is so problematic about the posting requirement for habitability trials. Is just like the irony of not being able to enforce your right to a safe, healthy home because you have health conditions is absolutely astounding to me.
Yeah, seems illogical. Any other issues or ideas anyone wants to raise?
I just wanted to add the one elephant in the room, which is with the federal government's impact to the state's funding and ability to support our residents in our state. Obviously, not only our programs are in jeopardy, but also I think that we will be seeing an increase in people seeking assistance with housing supports and eviction prevention, similar to when COVID hit and we had lots of people who had never experienced the need to reach out and receive rental assistance and other related resources, and who really were not, not hip to that system, not knowledgeable or sophisticated, and needed a lot of assistance in accessing and navigating that. I think we're going to see more folks, federal workers, veterans who need assistance, who have not had to access those services before and need a little bit more support than may otherwise have needed before.
Yeah, Ashley, thanks for raising that. And I think the challenges now that are different than COVID is that, right, we were in a different place financially, right, in terms of the dollars, both that were coming down from the federal government and the money that was accessible on the state level to provide additional supports. And given the current federal fiscal environment plus the state environment, right? We're not gonna there was a significant influx of money from the federal government to the states around when COVID happened to help with some of those extra needs. And we're not going to see that now, right? Like it's the exact right. Like the cause is that they're pulling money away. And so even on the state level, right, priorities are going to shift to different places because of the reduced federal dollars. And what does that mean for people? So yeah, it's a really good point. Anything else folks want to raise? Any other ideas?
Maybe just following up on the point that Ashley just raised around like the federal government and this sort of ongoing uncertainty that we're all navigating. I wondered if, with the list of ideas that we've all discussed on this call, are there ones that folks would put at the top of the list given the, ongoing federal uncertainty? Are there other ideas that kind of come out of that question of kind of reduced support or people entering the safety net that ordinarily wouldn't be in the safety net because there's less support from the federal government? Are there things that folks would prioritize? Just curious, following up on that. Or is it everything? All the ideas together?
Yeah, and I think too, just to add to that, I guess one of my questions would be like, for all of you and the programs that you run and sort of the people you're serving, like, do you have a sense of what which of those programs are federally funded and supported through federal dollars that are at risk? Because I think, right, that's just like a different way of asking, I think, the same question.
So again, my perspective is always going to be disability because that's just who we work
Thank
with.
you
But
for your willingness to
like for example, in New Jersey, in order to receive services from
this has been like a frustrating process.
And hold on, LaShonda, I think you're
don't know if I'm the only one that's having this problem.
I think you're unmuted.
But
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so in order to receive services from the Division of Developmental Disabilities in New Jersey, regardless of your income or your family's income, you need to be Medicaid eligible. So Medicaid is a huge one because it affects all the services that these folks receive, even housing, the housing programs that DDD provides. So Medicaid, Medicaid is at the top of my list in terms of federal dollars.
Yep, that
We're
makes
probably going to see a huge reduction in Section 8 vouchers and money for public housing. We fully expect that to happen. And that's going to be very problematic.
Yep.
Alex, let's take one last shot at making sure, number one, everybody has shared his or her contact information. And number two, shared any suggestions with respect to other folks that we ought to apprise of these activities or try to invite to be a part of them.
Sure. And then to Michael's earlier point, if anybody wants to talk offline, and have a separate conversation or one-on-one conversation, or wants to send me an email with ideas or thoughts, happy to do that as well. So feel free to reach out directly to me, and I'll put my email again in the chat, although I think you all have it from the calendar invite. Great. Any last closing thoughts? Otherwise, I'll talk through next steps. All right. So in terms of next steps, as Michael mentioned, we're going to have a third and final meeting. So I'm going to take the feedback from the first meeting, the feedback and discussion from this meeting. If I have any, one-on-one conversations with folks or individual ideas, come to me, and we'll summarize that and come up with basically a list of the different ideas and potential solutions or pilot programs that we've come up with. And then our last meeting, we will spend time talking through those, and in particular, going through the ones that we think are really feasible and could have an impact, and trying to talk through a little bit more of the details of those and what they could look like, putting a little bit of meat on the bones. So yeah, that's the plan, and that'll probably be the third meeting, I'd say within, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks or so, approximately. But we have your contact information, so we'll let you know when we pick a date for that. And like I said, I'm happy to chat offline one-on-one, so feel free to reach out directly. Otherwise, we'll be in touch soon. Michael, any closing thoughts from you?
Just, well, two. Number one, to thank you all again for being generous enough to share your time and your expertise with us. The other is that there are a series of these subject matter sessions that are going on. I told you we have completed transportation, but we are still working on employment, faith-based initiatives, mental health and substance use, food security, healthcare, literacy, the environment, veterans affairs, animal welfare, arts and culture, IT access, and a very broad category of education. So if those interest you, if you would just indicate in the chat that you'd like to be apprised of what we're doing, we'd be delighted to have you. And that's really it. What we need to do is make sure that when we have taken all of the information, all the thoughts, the perspectives that you all have shared with us, and we start to share them with people, that we can be comprehensive in terms of getting out these thoughts to a wide audience. And you can help us do that because you know who those people are. So we appreciate your help so far, and we're going to impose upon you for additional help. That's it, Alex.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. Have an enjoyable weekend, and thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.